My Lords, mobile phones have no place in our schools. The government's mobile phones in schools guidance is clear that schools should prohibit the use of devices with smart technology throughout the school day, including during lessons, transitions and breaks. We expect all schools to take steps in line with this guidance to ensure mobile phones do not disrupt pupils' learning. If pupils fail to follow those rules, schools have the power to confiscate devices.
Minister for her optimistic answer to my question. I wonder how many of your noble lordships are at this very moment distracted by the smartphone that they have with them. Yes, I look around and I see quite a few. Imagine then what it must be like to be the teacher of a class of 11-year-olds and try to hold their attention when they have their smartphones beside them. The Minister has given an optimistic answer, and I had hoped for unanimity in this matter because all of the evidence, all of the experts agree, as I think the Minister has just agreed, that having a smartphone with them at all times causes harm both educationally and socially to children and young people. To bring about the change that's necessary, will the Minister show some leadership and agree to the amendment which my colleagues, my noble friends, have submitted to the education bill that's about to come to Parliament?
Well, my optimism is not just based on vain hope, but also, of course, on the most recent report from the Children's Commissioner that shows that the overwhelming majority of schools, that's over 99.8% of primary schools and 90% of secondary schools, already have policies in place that limit or restrict the use of mobile phones during the school day. There is ample opportunity through both the guidance and the autonomy and wisdom of head teachers to ensure that we make considerable progress on this issue, as we're already seeing.
My Lords, school leaders, public health, Dan Tomlinson MP and the Smartphone Free Childhood campaign have come together in Barnet to become the first borough to ban smartphones in 103 primary schools, and 23 secondary schools are working towards removing smartphones entirely from the school day. This is ensuring that 63,000 students will enjoy a 7-hour window to learn, socialise and grow without a mobile phone. What assessment has my noble friend, the Minister, made of local initiatives like this one in Barnet that we also find in areas like Ealing and St Albans?
Well, I think my noble friend identifies a really important development, actually, which is whilst schools can and do control the availability of mobile phones for children, of course, children's access to phones is much broader than that, and the support for children to be able to operate without their phones also needs a broader range of people than simply teachers and head teachers. So that type of initiative demonstrates what's already happening under the current guidance. And I think when people come together in that sort of way to support each other, it's something that is to be recognised and for which they should be congratulated.
My Lords, as a teacher, I've never taught in a school that actually allows mobile phones. The Noble Minister said that mobile phones have no place in schools, whilst giving head teachers autonomy to make decisions. The Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill is taking away autonomy for head teachers. Isn't it time we just had a blanket ban on mobile phones?
Well, I mean, the Noble Lord, of course, raises an interesting point, which is that those who argue that autonomy for head teachers is important, which this government supports, and by the way, I would dispute his interpretation of the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill, which we'll have plenty of opportunity to discuss in more detail over the coming week. It's precisely those who make that charge who now want to remove that autonomy through saying that legislation is the only way to make progress.
Well, first of all, I agree very much with what the Minister has said. One of the problems with mobile phones, of course, is to do with children's mental health and well-being and of course bullying. Mobile phones are often used to bully pupils. I wonder whether the Minister would agree that it's important, however, that governing bodies of schools where parents are represented actually understand the issues and are able to discuss them and come to some conclusions.
Yes, I think the Noble Lord makes a really important point, and I'm sure that both in the policies that schools are have developed with relation to mobile phone use, and also the policies which they are required to have in place around bullying, for example, will benefit from well-informed governors and input from parents and others on governing bodies to making sure that they are effective and that they respond to some of the challenges that the use of mobile phone technology has certainly brought.
My Lords, the Noble Baroness, the Minister rightly cites some of the evidence in this area, but I do think it is becoming overwhelming. So the Children's Commissioner is right about the number of schools who have policies in this area, but the question is, are they being effective? And the evidence from Parent Kind and policy exchanges, only 10 to 15% of schools have a really effective ban on phones. The department's own evidence shows that 50% of GCSE classes are disrupted by the use of phones, and we're hearing increasing evidence from healthcare professionals about the impact on our children. So the Noble Lady rightly says that on this side of the House we uphold autonomy in our schools and in our academy trusts, but this is about a precautionary principle and protecting our children. What is stopping the Noble Lady from moving on this?
Well, the Noble Lady identifies the need for all of us to continue thinking about the best practice for ensuring that schools are making sure that their classrooms are mobile phone free and are working on the very best evidence. There are a whole range of ways that schools are responding to this, and it's fair to say that it would be good for schools to look at the very best practice across the schools that are taking action. But I'm afraid that her point was this is difficult and nuanced, and people are doing it in a different way, and there needs to be detailed consideration about how to do it best. None of those things would be delivered by I hate in this place to call legislation crude, but none of them would be delivered simply by legislating for something which the Noble Lady has identified is more complex than that.
My Lords, sometimes technology can help to deal with social problems. As a Faraday cage blocks phone signals, it would be appropriate to install those cages into all classrooms and prevent pupils from being distracted by mobile phones. So can I ask the Minister to experiment with this technology?
I think I'm right in saying that there are already some schools that are using that technology, including also a range of other uses of technology to help to keep mobile phones in special bags that prevent them from being used. There are a whole range of ways that schools are making progress on this, and the Noble Lord is right that sometimes technology can be the answer to the problems caused by other forms of technology.
Would the Minister recognise, however, there may be reasonable exceptions to this according to the particular circumstances of the student, which may or may not be temporary?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why there needs to be some flexibility. I think the Noble Lord might be referring, for example, to some children who might, for particular reasons, perhaps related to the distance they have to travel to school, or perhaps related to particular special needs that they have, for which they may well need to have the adjustment that can be provided for them by a mobile phone. Those are circumstances in which schools should be and are thinking about the particular ways in which they think about the ban, but to ensure that all children are able to achieve and have the support that they need.
France has seen an improvement at schools' results and less bullying at schools since they introduced a national ban in 2018, 7 years ago. Isn't it time we follow that example and have a national ban as opposed to guidances?
Well, I think we could say that what both the previous government and this government has done is rather more than simply guidance. There's been a very, very clear direction. But I'm sure the noble lady will understand the French education system is somewhat more directive than the British education system if she wants, and her party wants us to go down that route. That's an interesting development, but I don't think that is what her and her party want to happen.